On behalf of the Harvard Ed Portal, we want to welcome you to our very first faculty speaker of 2016. And I will now turn the time over to Professor Rob Liu, who's the faculty director of the Harvard Ed Portal, to introduce our speaker.
So welcome everyone, and for those of you that are tuning in from around the world, we are in Allston, Massachusetts, a great place to be. So welcome not only to the Harvard Ed Portal, but I think more importantly to Allston, Massachusetts as well. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce a colleague and truly a star, not only at the Harvard Law School, but frankly in the firmament of moving forward how we think about online education, and in this case, online education that addresses the law. So with degrees from Princeton, Oxford, and the Columbia Law School, Charles Freed is the beneficial professor of law at the Harvard Law School, and he has been at HLS since 1961. He was the Solicitor General of the United States from 1985 to 1989, and an Associate Justice of the Supreme Judicial Court of Massachusetts from 1995 to 1999. Charles's scholarly and teaching interests have really moved towards the connection between theory and the concrete institutions of both public and private law. He's a remarkably prolific author and a wonderful teacher at the Harvard Law School, where he has taught criminal law, commercial law, Roman law, torts, contracts, labor law, constitutional law, federal courts, and Supreme Court advocacy. In recent years, he has taught constitutional law and contracts, and as an author, he has addressed things like the anatomy of values, right and wrong, modern liberty, that seeks to develop themes in moral and political philosophy with applications to law, and very importantly and relevant to what we'll hear about tonight, contract as promise. So Charles is one of those brave individuals and one of the very early Harvard Law School professors that engaged with HarvardX, realizing that this represents an opportunity to not only expand the reach of his perspective on the law, but also to bring so many people, both local but also from all over the world, into an understanding of how both Charles and Harvard Law School thinks about, in this specific case, contracts. What's also striking is that we hear a lot about how many people might sign into courses, but not a lot finish with it and stick with it. Charles's course is markedly different in terms of the degree of engagement and the degree of commitment to learning from this master of the law school. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Charles Freed.
Thank you, Rob. It's very nice to see you. And I don't see all the people who are online, but hello. You might well ask, why a MOOC on contracts? And in fact, this MOOC explicitly is a MOOC for laypersons. I say, if you're a lawyer, I don't want you. If you're thinking of going to law school, well, that's okay. If you're a law student, go to law school, go to your class. This is not for lawyers, this is for human beings. And that's the focus here. Now, why, for human beings, a MOOC on contracts? Good question. As Rob's introductions indicated, I have taught all kinds of courses. I love this. I love contract for reasons which I'll tell you about. Contract, first of all, is everywhere in your lives. But it's everywhere in your lives in a different way from other things in the law, which are everywhere in your lives. For instance, if you should have the misfortune of having somebody run into your car and dent it, That's a tort, and that's a whole different subject, which I've also taught, and that is then very much in your life. And if it hasn't happened to you, it may very well happen to you. But contract is different. The reason it's different, is that contracts are things that don't happen to you. They are things you go out and do. They are arrangements you make. And that is such a more gratifying thing. It's not defensive. It's not something that you wish hadn't happened. Not at all. It's something you've made happen. And that's wonderful. And of course, contracts are everywhere. Wherever you go, there are contracts. When you get into a taxi, that's a contract. You don't sign a piece of paper, you don't have to. The assumption is that the driver will take you where you want to go, and that you'll pay him when you get there. You sit down in a restaurant, they bring you the food. The assumption is that at the end of the meal, you're going to get a bill and you're going to pay it. It's not as you say, well, thank you very much. That's very good. I'll come back next week. That was so delicious. No, you have a contract. It's not one that was written down, but both of you understood it. And that's the first thing I want to talk about. I'm not going to go through the whole course here, but I'll just give you a flavor of what the course is about and what the subject is about. Well, here's the first thing. It's about understanding. People could not have contracts if they didn't understand each other. In fact, understanding is the basis for collaboration. Understanding is the basis for getting anything done together. And there's the picture of the 8, and everybody is going in the same direction. And they're not only going in the same direction, they're going at the same speed with the same stroke. And if somebody doesn't understand that, and the Cox hasn't been able to explain it in whatever the Cox's way of explaining it might be, the boat is going to catch a crab. It might even flip over. So understanding is crucial to any kind of a collaborative endeavor. Does anybody know what that's a picture of? Anybody know what that is? Yes, sir.
Is it perhaps Mont Saint-Michel in France?
No, it certainly isn't. No, it's a wreck. Yes. That's the Tower of Babel. That's Hieronymus Bosch. By the way, there's a big show of Hieronymus Bosch, I think, at the Harvard Art Museum. But this is a 16th century painter who loved to paint about things that go wrong. And you all know the story of the Tower of Babel. These people in actually Babylon, they wanted to build a tower all the way up to God. Now, God didn't think that, he thought that was pushing it a little far. And he thought, well, I'm going to put an end to it. And how did he put an end to it? He caused them all to speak different languages, so they could no longer understand each other. And what happens? The thing grinds to a halt. They can't go any further because they cannot communicate. So the first thing about contracts is that contracts are about collaboration, and collaboration requires understanding, mutual communication. Okay. But there's more to it than that, because you can understand each other, and here, and we'll go back to the 8, moment by moment, they know what's supposed to happen next. But contracts are usually about something that moves into the future. And here, let me give you a little parable. I love stories. And contrary, one of the reasons I love this subject is because there are so many stories about the things that people try to do together, the enterprises they undertake. And they undertake every kind of enterprise. I will tell you about 2 of them later. But just now, my general point is that contracts are about understanding into the future. And here's the little parable. I want to build some kind of a machine. And it takes all sorts of materials, and I can't use them all at once. First I do this, and then I do that, and then I progress. We go up. And the other thing is, I can't really pay for everything that I need all at once. So what do I want? Ideally, what I want is that I get my suppliers to give me the things I need as I need them. That's terrific for a number of reasons. I don't have to pay for everything all at once. If I had to wait until I had enough money to pay for everything, I would maybe never get going, or I'd wait a long time before I could get going. But it doesn't work like that. I need one thing, and I pay for it. Then, on the back of that, I need the next thing, and that will be delivered to me. But all of that depends not just on communicating my needs, but on trust. That's the next thing, trust. I have to trust that my suppliers will supply me as I go along. That's why I don't have to collect everything in advance. And they are going to trust me to pay them as they deliver. Well, that way things get built much faster. And that trust has a name. Does anybody know what the name for that trust is? When somebody is going to give me something because they trust me, I get it on credit. That's right. Now, you know what credit comes from? Comes from the Latin word credere, which means believe, to trust. So this whole enterprise, our ability to work together and make things, depends not only on our ability to communicate, but on our trusting each other. Now, how do we establish that I am going to trust you and you are going to trust me? That's called what? When I say that you're going to do something for me and I'm going to do something for you, what is that called? In plain English.
Reciprocity?
Promise. That's a promise. And so there we are. It is reciprocity. I mean, you're dead right. It just wasn't what I was looking for. Okay, so that's why this whole course, which goes on for quite a long time, has that title, From Trust to Promise to Contract. Because what is contract? Contract is, and this is a famous definition of contract, is a promise or a set of promises for the breach of which the law gives a remedy. Now, by and large, most promises don't need the remedy because most promises are fulfilled. If they weren't, then we wouldn't have the institution. You know, when you get into the cab, the driver doesn't ask you to pay in advance. I think at McDonald's you do have to pay in advance. But if you go into a restaurant, by and large, people trust each other. And why do they trust each other? Because they make implicit promises. Now, often those promises will become explicit, implicit promises. And if you try to walk out of the restaurant without paying, the law will give the restaurateur a remedy. But by and large, it doesn't. You don't need to get to that point because people rely on contracts. They make the world go round, and that's why I love this subject, because unlike torts, certainly unlike the criminal law, contracts make the world go round. Contracts are the example of people with projects, human beings who are manifesting themselves, getting together, and together making things happen. That's what happens in a contract. Well, there are all kinds of contracts, many, many different kinds of contracts. I sat down just last night when I was thinking, well, what kinds of contracts are there? There are employment contracts. You all know those if you're employed. There are leases. A lease is a contract. You remember when you signed up for your apartment? That's a contract. It's a special kind. It's called a lease, but that's a contract. There are insurance contracts, very different sort of things. Building contracts, contracts for transportation, whether it is when you get in the cab or when you step onto a bus, or if you are moving and you hire the moving company. Those are all contracts. Then there's another very interesting kind of contract, settlement agreements. You've gotten into a fight with somebody about something. There's a disagreement. And you both are at each other's throats. And then you say, well, hey, let's negotiate this and let's reach a settlement. That's a contract. It's a contract about a crime, maybe, or about a tort, or about some other kind of a dispute. But that's a contract which settles it. And that is a promise. What is it, a promise? One party says, well, okay, I'll pay you this much. I'm not going to pay you everything you want, but I'm going to pay you this much. And I say, okay, and I promise that I won't sue you. That's a contract. And believe it or not, the law gives you a remedy for its breach. Another kind of contract, very intricate, very different, a prenuptial agreement. just in case things go wrong. That happens. But that's a contract. And each of those contracts, and many, many other kinds, and there are sub-kinds, different kinds of insurance contracts, different kinds of whatever. Well, each of those allow the world to move forward and in a collaborative way. Well, now let me tell you a little story. I'm glad to say I never did this to anybody, but I play a role in this story. And on the MOOC, you'll see a picture where I am the villain. I'm the bad guy. The bad guy is a professor, the law professor. Me, I'm a law professor. And the victim is a former student of mine, student I like very much. She's graduated now. She's married. She's got a job. She just got a job in a law firm. And I know that her husband is a wonderful cook. She could boil water, but her husband's a terrific cook. And she knows that her senior partner, the person on whom her career depends, really likes the kind of food that her husband cooks. And her senior partner also had been my student. He admires me, and she thinks, what a wonderful opportunity. I will have Freed to dinner and my senior partner to dinner, and what a marvelous evening that will be, and my career will just take off after that. Freed and the partner will be talking about old times and all sorts of things, and the food will be terrific. Well, so she and her husband invite me to dinner on February 1st, 7:30, show up. Oh yeah, I'll be there with bells on. I'll bring a bottle of wine. February 1st shows up. I happen to notice there's the next episode of Billions. And I thought, I don't want to miss that. Yeah, I'll stay home. And they just don't show up. Well, they sit there. 7:30, I'm not there. 7:15, 7:45, not there. Beginning to worry. 8 o'clock, the food is burning. They call up. I've turned my phone off. I didn't want to have my television interrupted. So what happens? They sit there. The food is spoiled. The partner is cranky. It's been an awful bust. Terrible evening. Now, the result is that when she shows up at work the next morning and the partner passes her in the hallway, he doesn't even say hello. I mean, it's really been a disaster. Well, can she sue me? Is this a promise? Were there promises? You bet there were. I promised to come to dinner, and she promised to serve a dinner. My favorite, and the partner's favorite. So there were promises. But is it promise for the breach of which the law gives a remedy? What do you think? What do you think? Well, who spoke up? Who was that? Yeah, what do you think? Do you think she can sue me for not showing up?
No, because it was like a friendship situation. It wasn't a business situation.
It wasn't a business situation, that's true. But of course, it doesn't always, to be a contract for which the law gives a remedy, it doesn't have to be a business situation. I mean, you can exchange things, you know, your apartment. You've got an apartment, you're going away for the summer, somebody else needs it for the summer. Say, okay, you can have the apartment if you look after the dog and pay the utilities. And it's a friend.
Yeah,
The
but
law
that's
will
more
give you a
likely.
remedy for that. That's a business. Is that a business? I don't know whether it's
I
business.
think it'd be more likely in the second scenario to sue rather than the first one.
But it doesn't have to be in writing in either case, right? And the invitation, well, you know, the invitation might have been in writing. I might have sent you an email. But she might have sent me an email. I may have sent her an email. But being in writing isn't the heart of it. But I think you're putting your finger. It just isn't the kind of thing that people expect to end up in court about. It's not just that it's not a business, but it's a friendly social interaction which people don't want to end up in court about. There's lots of things like that. Romantic exchanges, and you can tell your own story about those, where there really is one thing for another, but nobody wants those to end up in court. So those are not, and they may really be promises, by the way, but the law will not give you a remedy for them. But that's not what we want to talk about. We want to talk about, and in the MOOC we do talk about, those promises for which the law will give a remedy. And let me tell you about two of them, which they're two stories that I like very much. They both ended up in the Supreme Court of the United States. They wouldn't today because the Supreme Court doesn't take this kind of case. But it did then. In those days, Supreme Court took many different ordinary cases. This is the case, has a name, Laidlaw against Orgain, and it was decided by the Supreme Court in 1817. This is what happened. Laidlaw went to Orgain, who was a tobacco broker. He was a tobacco broker in New Orleans. New Orleans was the great port where tobacco country, Kentucky and so on, went down the Mississippi, and the brokers were, later it was cotton brokers, but tobacco brokers were there. And the buyer then was negotiating with a tobacco broker. These people, you know, they collect tobacco from all the farmers that come and the shippers, and they send it on to people. And New Orleans is a great port, and this person was negotiating for tobacco. Well, the date, the Supreme Court decided in 1817, but the date of their discussions was in 1815, February 1815. And do you know what was going on in the United States around then? Does anybody know enough history to know what was happening? The War of 1812. That's right. Good for you, the War of 1812. And who had the great fleet in those days? The British. And they were our enemies. And one of the things they did is they blockaded the port of New Orleans. So what do you think that would do to the price of tobacco? Anybody have, what do you think, sir?
Increase.
What?
Increase the price of tobacco.
If you're trying to sell it in New Orleans, you're a tobacco broker in, you can't get it out of the port. It's blockaded. Not increase, down. Drives the price down. You can't sell it. Well, this is what happened. He was negotiating, and he was negotiating on the evening of, I have the date, on the evening of the 18th of February. At dawn, on the 19th of February, he shows up at the broker's place of business, and he says, I want to buy, how many? 111 hogsheads of, that's what it says in the report, 111 hogsheads of tobacco. You know, that's a huge amount. A hogshead is a big, big wooden barrel, which, when I looked it up, contains, if fully packed, 1,400 pounds of tobacco. So this guy was buying 80 tons of tobacco. He shows up at the crack of dawn and says to the broker, I'm going to buy 80 tons of tobacco. Well, that's nice. At the price they discussed the night before, which, as I said, is driven down because of the blockade. And he's a little bit curious, and he says, do you know anything? Is there some, because it's rather, and he says, my goodness, what beautiful weather we're having. Do you notice how those clouds, those are beautiful alto cirrus clouds and so on and so forth? The broker says, okay, the price is so and so. They conclude the deal. Well, what do you think had happened? What had happened is the buyer had a friend in the British fleet that was blockading the port, and they had gotten word that it took 2 months. It was didn't get it on the internet, that on December 24th, the Americans and the British had signed the Treaty of Ghent. The war was over, and the blockade would be lifted in the next couple of hours. And of course, the price of tobacco was way up. Well, the seller doesn't want to deliver it. He feels he's been snookered. He's mad as hell. Buyer sues him, goes all the way to the Supreme Court. And the decision is by Chief Justice Marshall, who was still, to my mind, the best justice we've ever had on the court, a great man. What do you think happened? Who do you think won? Let's get someone else here. What do you? Yes, sir.
It kind of sounds like inside trading.
Pardon?
It kind of sounds like inside.
It's that's very good. It is absolutely insider trading. But who do you think won? You've got a name for it, but who do you think won?
I think he got away with it.
What?
I think he got away with it. I don't think he got.
The buyer got away with it.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. Your instincts are fine. And this is what John Marshall, he's known as the great Chief Justice, what he said. The court is of the opinion that he was not bound to communicate his special knowledge. It would be difficult to circumscribe the contrary doctrine. You know something. You know something because you read it in the papers and the other guy didn't. It would be difficult to circumscribe the contrary doctrine within proper limits, whereas the means of intelligence are equally accessible to both parties. Not quite true. But at the same time, each party, now pay attention to this, each party must take care not to say or do anything tending to impose upon the other. Do you see why I told the story the way I did? I didn't make that up. It's in the report of the case. Do you know something? Never answered. He never talked about the weather. Now, if the seller had been shrewd enough, he would say, you know, he didn't answer me. I noticed that. And there's a big deal here. I'm not going to sell it. And so the question is, did he do or say anything tending to impose on the seller? And the court said no. Now, you talked about insider trading, but you know why insider trading is different? Since you started, why do you think insider trading is it? Because you know, you're quite right about it, so good for you.
It's different, I guess, because with the intent, well, I don't know. I think it's the same.
The insider has no right to use that knowledge. It's confidential knowledge. It's knowledge that he's got as an insider. This guy just happened to have the news. It was public news. Now, it was public news in London, but he had the news. So he knew something that the other didn't. And he didn't lie about it. He just used that knowledge. You know, that happens these days in commodities trading. You go out and you want to buy soybeans. Well, what you've done is you've done a lot of research, El Nino and so on and so forth, and you think there's going to be terrible drought in soybean country, because that's what I think happens when El Nino is out there and the soybean country's here. It's going to be a drought. So I am going to buy a lot of soybeans because with the drought, the price is going to go up. Well, you buy them. Somebody says, do you know something? You don't have to answer them. They could go on the internet. They could study about El Nino just as much as you can. They didn't. You did. You win. And that's this case. The other thing that's fun about these, and contract law is full of, you take the MOOC, I've got dozens of cases like this, equally amusing. But you've learned something about the War of 1812 in the course of this, and you've learned something about the tobacco trade. Also, how big a hogshead is. Well, let me tell you one more story, and then we'll stop and we'll just have a general talk. Where is? Do we have the Yasha? Do we have the video of the of Post v. Jones, the whaling ship? No, we don't. Doesn't matter. We won't waste time on that. Well, here's the story. This is a wonderful story. I love it. Why am I showing you that? This is another Supreme Court case from 1856. Well, there was a ship, a whaling ship. There were actually 3 whaling ships that came out of Sag Harbor on Long Island. There was a big whaling port. Does anybody know where Sag Harbor is? Well, you do. You have Long Island, and Long Island's got these two forks, North Fork, South Fork, and Sag Harbor is a harbor in between there. It's a very safe harbor, and was in those days a big whaling port. Now, you may or may not know, maybe from reading Moby Dick, that whale oil and whalebone was very, very valuable, which is why people risked their lives going after it. Well, this ship had been out hunting whales for 3 years, and it was full of whale oil and the whalebone. You know, they catch the whale, they boil down the oil, they put it into barrels, they stack the bone, which is used for ladies' corsets, and it's an incredibly valuable cargo. And so they were absolutely fully laden. They were going to go home now and clean up. Unfortunately, there was a storm and the boat wrecked on one of these islands. This is the Bering Sea. It wrecked there. It didn't wreck so much that it went down. It just drove up on the island. The hull was useless. The ship was no good. The sailors managed to scramble ashore on the island, which is more or less deserted. And there were these two other ships, both also from Sag Harbor, because they hunted in packs. These two other ships, however, were just at the beginning of their journey. They were empty. And the captains all knew each other. They came up. They took the stranded sailors off the island, of course, and that one does that. And then they said, but what are we going to do with the cargo? The sailor of one of the captain of one of the rescuing ships said, well, we got to be fair about this. We'll have an auction. And we will auction off the whale oil and the whalebone on this ship. They had an auction, and they sold the whale. I have the figure somehow, for something like 1/20th of its market price. But you know, if they had left it there, it would have been completely gone. So the two ships bought the whale oil at the auction, took the sailors, the wrecked sailors, home to Sag Harbor, and when they got there, the owner of the ship sued the two other owners for the value of the oil and bone that they're taking. What do you think the Supreme Court said? What is your sense? What is your sense of fairness and how the law ought to treat? I mean, there was a promise. They promised money for whale oil. A contract. Why isn't that good enough? See if you can get somebody else in there. What your instinct is. Yes, sir.
Promise under duress.
Pardon?
Promise under duress.
Under duress? Well, no, duress is fine. I like that word. It means they got a gun to his head. But they didn't have a gun to his head. Life had a gun to his head. But they didn't wreck his ship. They didn't do it to him.
They had a duty with the people that they picked up to save them.
Pardon?
They had a duty with the people they picked up to save them and bring them to safety.
Well, they picked them up. They could have left the whale oil there. They didn't have to buy it, and they didn't have to sell it. You're quite right. They probably had a duty to rescue the sailors. But
Wouldn't the boat been too heavy if they didn't get rid of all their
no,
supplies?
no. That boat was wrecked. It weren't going nowhere. No. Yes, ma'am.
It seems like it would still be in favor of the two ships that would get the oil because it was an opportunity where if he had been able to negotiate higher prices and held out, then maybe they would have paid it, but he didn't.
It would have been quite a bargain, don't you think? I mean, I tell you this story because it's the same court that decide Laidlaw with the tobacco. And this is what the court said. It's interesting. It said, well, you know, that's not a real auction. And that's very much what your instinct was. There's a custom of the sea, a law of the sea, which says that if you rescue the cargo of a wrecked ship, you are entitled to what's called salvage, which is 1/2 the value of the cargo. But that's all you're entitled to. You can't get more. So there was a contract there. It wasn't under duress, because they could say, hey, you know, we didn't do it to you. You don't like it? We'll take you home and you leave it there. At least you got 10 cents on the dollar. What are you complaining about? Well, the law says that among seafarers, there is, and you had it, there is, it's not a duty to engage in salvage, but if you do, all you get is half the value. And that sort of makes sense. There's a wonderful book about travel in the Arabian desert. It's a book by a man called Wilfred Thesiger, who's one of these English adventurer travelers. Richard Burton's father was one of those. And Thesiger says that when you travel in the Arabian desert, in the Rub al-Khali, when you travel there, anybody coming upon a camel is entitled to milk that camel, because you're all, to mix a metaphor, all in the same boat, as it were. And similarly with seafarers, but all you can't eat the camel, and you can't certainly take it and use it to transport your goods. You can milk it. And with salvage, you don't get to keep the whole thing, but you do get paid half. Okay, so this is the very beginning of the MOOC on contract. My goodness, do we have a lot of rules and stories. They go on for days. But I just wanted to give you a taste of it. So now, let's all talk.
Thank you, Gerald.
Yes, in the back.
We're going to pass around mics so our online viewers can also hear. So when you have a question, just wait. Jason or I will bring you a mic. So again, who is the question? Yes, and Charles, if you will answer questions from the microphone, you'd be willing to.
Oh, this microphone
Yes.
here. Okay, I can do that. That's the deal. Otherwise, they won't give me any cheese and crackers.
It's a contract.
Yeah. Please.
So do you read all the terms and conditions that you sign up for online? And is
I'm
that a
s-
contract?
I'm sorry, I didn't.
Do you read and review all the terms and conditions that the digital age?
Oh, what
now-
a good question. I almost, with many of the things, I do not. I admit it. Look, here we are. You get an update on your Microsoft Word. Do you agree? If you don't push that button, it won't proceed to the next screen. So I push it. And so the answer is I don't. Therefore, what? What do you make of that? Because it's a very good question, and there's a lot that we can learn from it. What do you think that proves? Yeah. Hey, you started it. Bring her back the mic.
The company is depending on your ignorance to.
Well, I would think it's something like this. Remember, something like this. Nobody reads that. Everybody knows that nobody reads it. And therefore, it's just a lot of words. And what the courts will do is will say, hey, you know, is this the kind of thing that people expect is going to happen? And if they have a reasonable expectation that that's what it's going to be like, that's what it's like. Now, let me turn the tables on that. Let's say that you're not buying an update on your Microsoft Word, but what you're doing is you are the general counsel of a multi-billion-dollar company, which, you know, that may happen to you, and you are buying, you are acquiring another company. You know, you are Genzyme, and I am Sanofi, which, as you know, Sanofi just recently bought Genzyme. Okay, so that agreement is probably about this thick, and it contains all kinds of things. Among other things, there may be a clause there which says that if any of the Genzyme patents are declared invalid, then the price that's been paid will be decreased by so-and-so, you know, something like that. Well, that happens. And Sanofi says, hey, it's been held invalid. Oh, I didn't read that. What do you think the courts would say to that argument? What do you think? Pardon? No, give her the mic.
Too bad. So sad.
Too bad. Yeah, absolutely. So, if you are a $1,000 an hour lawyer and you're negotiating, and you've negotiated and signed a $10 billion deal, don't come back and tell me, oh, well, I didn't read that, you know. It was too long and I was tired and, you know, it wasn't. That won't work. But on that online update, it's a different story. I can promise you that. Now, I'm not going to give you all the reasons why that is, because we'd be here for the duration of the MOOC. That's why I'm teaching the MOOC. But that's part of the story, and your question was a very good one. Yes, sir.
So I come from the world of mental health where people always argue, obviously among marriage, which is a type of contract.
From mental health?
Yeah, I mean,
Well,
there's a lot
listen,
of...
I come from a family where people always argue. And these are my grandchildren. They're great at arguing. Arguing is not a mental health issue.
So this is so my question is about when things go wrong.
Oh.
All right, so communication obviously is a process of understanding and then being understood.
Yes.
Now, even when we all speak the same language, often all of us use words, and I'm going to give you three very good examples: love, fairness, justice, that we all think we agree on, but in fact we don't. So, do you think, because we often share a common language, but not always a common understanding among commonly shared words, that this gives rise to more explicit agreements versus implicit agreements? And also, just to tack this on, I also think mistakenly a lot of people, especially lawyers, default to thinking that the law is about the letter of the law rather than the spirit of the law. And could you speak to that point as it relates to contract law?
Oh, that's, boy, that is, yeah, I could take a drink of water. You know what the answer is? Sometimes. But no, I don't want to be a wise guy about this, but if you have a great inequality of people, somebody is not a specialist talking to somebody who is, then the specialist is going to be held to being very clear and in talking to the language of the other guy. You see this in insurance contracts, a very good example. In insurance contracts, you look at your car insurance contract or your homeowners or something of that sort. There may be a lot of stuff in there. It's really hard to understand. You know what the courts say? We will construe that against the person who wrote it. So if there's any doubt, the guy who wrote it is going to be at the short end of the stick.
Prenups, that's where that happens.
Oh, is that?
Parties don't have a lawyer.
There must be. You mean they do a prenup sort of?
And one was a lawyer and the other party didn't have a lawyer.
Well, there, and the lawyer has drafted it. It will be construed against the one that had the lawyer. That's the usual thing. But Genzyme and Sanofi, no takesies backsies. That's you live by the sword, you die by the sword. You're stuck.
Professor Freed,
Yes, ma'am.
would you be willing to take some online questions as well?
Of course.
All right, one question that's come in is, in your opinion, what is the influence of boilerplate clauses in the formation of commercial contracts? And if you could talk briefly about advantages and disadvantages of adding these large sections of template language.
Boilerplates. Boilerplate. You know what boilerplate is. Can you imagine what that is? These are the contracts where they're pre-printed often, and they have all kinds of writing on them, which they get them off a pad, and those boilerplate language sometimes is very useful. In Sanofi and Genzyme, they probably had lots in those thousands of pages of that contract. They probably had a lot of boilerplate. And that's useful, because what's useful about it is that everybody's been there before. Other companies have bought other companies. They've fought it out. They've worked out the language, and they don't have to reinvent the wheel. That's very useful. But if the boilerplate is there and you have unequal parties and the boilerplate is overwhelming an inexperienced person, courts will often say, no, we're not going to hold you to the letter. We're going to hold you to what ordinary people imagine is the essence of this deal. And if there's a surprise lurking in that boilerplate, we're not going to follow through on it. Yes.
My question, and I don't know if I can word it correctly, but here goes.
Hey, we'll work on it together.
I want to know about your quote where you said, "What do you know?" In terms of getting information. That person knew something, and he didn't tell the other party because he wanted a great deal on the tobacco.
That's right.
So
But he didn't say, no, I don't know anything.
Right. So
he didn't say that.
So my question is, what is that called again? And do you feel that that thing happens more often today? And how does that affect law in terms of the outcome in a court case? I mean, you even have websites that are only around for 24 hours that these public agencies are using. So I wanted to know those three things.
Well, it has something to do with the insider trading and so on. You know, if you're buying 40 tons of tobacco and you are selling, you're a broker selling 40 tons of tobacco, don't expect the courts to cut you any slack. You ought to know what you're doing. He knew enough to ask. And if he knew enough to ask, he should have known enough that he didn't get an answer. And so that case was correctly decided. Now, if it had been genuine insider trading, that the buyer had illegal knowledge. Right, that's it. But he didn't have illegal knowledge. He just, my example of El Nino. He just put two and two together, and he thought a lot, and he took a risk that he knew something, and that works.
What about a different example? If you keep asking and if you keep asking and they still deny that they know, but they're not telling.
No, they aren't denying. He didn't deny it. He didn't answer. That's the point.
So if he said he didn't know, that
Oh.
would have been different?
Oh, no, that's different. That, Marshall would say, must take care not to do or say anything tending to impose on the other. He lied. A lie will undo the deed. But he didn't lie. He just didn't answer. Beautiful weather we're having. Yes, ma'am.
I had a question about real estate.
About what?
Real estate law.
Real estate, yeah,
Yes.
okay.
Years ago, I took a course for real estate broker's license in Massachusetts, and I remember the first thing they told us was never sign an exclusive listing with the real estate agent. And my family is looking to sell some property.
Oh, if you want a legal opinion, I'm not going to give you one.
I was just going to ask
I'm
about.
not going to give you legal advice. You might sue me if it doesn't
No.
go right.
I was just going to ask
If I were
about.
a doctor here,
yeah.
I wouldn't prescribe to you, and oh no, I'm smarter than that.
Yeah.
She's asking why not, which is a different question.
Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah, like why not be exclusive? Like what are the differences?
Well, I think the word, you're listing the house?
No, she is.
Yeah, but an owner is listing, there's an upside and a downside.
Right.
You give an exclusive, that means you're stuck with that broker. You don't give an exclusive, the broker's not going to have that much interest in selling it. So you you figure it. Am I willing to buy the devotion of this broker, if I am, I've got to pay by giving that broker an exclusive. You know,
Yeah.
and that means figuring out what kind of a broker it is, and you know, that happens a lot. You have a lot of situations, there's somebody you really want to perform a service for you. They won't do it unless you give them an exclusive. Other people are hungry for business and they won't demand it.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
A person has a patent idea and needs to have the patent idea made into something. And what step should they take then to try to get the idea made into something tangible and then get a patent?
I'm not going to do that. You want legal advice. You got what you paid for. Nothing. Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
Hi, I work for a software company, and a lot of our business is done on purchase order. So we send the customer a quote with our terms and conditions.
That's wonderful.
We get a PO with their terms and conditions, and we fulfill the order. But my question is, can they enforce the PO's T's and C's on the company if something goes wrong?
Very often what will happen, and I'm not going to answer the question because it's incredibly complicated. The Uniform Commercial Code has a whole section on that, 2207. But it works like this. I send out a purchase order with a lot of boilerplate on it, and it says, acceptance means that you accept all of these terms, and I do not accept any variation. The other person sends in an acceptance on his form. He says, I accept the purchase on these terms and on none other, and if you don't accept those, we don't have a deal. It's called the battle of the forms. You know what the courts do? The court says, hey, you know, they cancel each other out, and what you have is just a sale of goods, and we'll forget about both of them. It's like, you know, well, you see, you get my point.
Yeah.
But that's the end of a very long story.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
This lady, this gentleman. Yeah.
Let's just take one more question and then we'll finish up.
So I'm a computer scientist from MIT, and I see that the world, especially the digital transformation, actually expands our language to another one, like the written one, like in Facebook, where you have messages. And contract law is very dependent on understanding. And if you want to do a contract, then people have to be serious with each other. But how can you, like, what would you say if in a Facebook message or in like a chat where you suddenly like seriousness and non-seriousness cannot be like, it's very like uncertain. Would contract law, like, do you think contract law is a fixed idea, or does it have to evolve with the digital transformation?
Well, contract law is very general, and it can address all kinds of different situations. So to answer that kind of question, one would have to know what the contract said, what the situation was, which is why I told you those stories. You can't just, there isn't an algorithm. You're an MIT guy. Minsky couldn't do it. Thank you very much.